everyone for attending, and I just want to do a big shout out really for our friends from BioHealth, who I think have done an amazing job organizing this and giving everyone an opportunity to learn about functional medicine, not only here in Mexico, but throughout Latin America. So I think we're very fortunate that of all their hard work in terms of making all these things happen. I'm just going to make sure I explain to everyone what KBMO stands for. So K is for Catherine, my wife, B is for Ben, my son, M is Max, my other son, and O is Olivia. We saved the best till last, Olivia, my daughter. So again, it's a family-run company, and we're very keen to make sure that we help all our clients, as whether they're here in Mexico, anywhere in Latin America, or around the world, as you'll see through the presentation. So again, we'll go over the testing in terms of how that works. And we'll give you an overview of food sensitivities and some of the new products we've developed, and actually things that we're going to launch here actually this month. So again, this will be the first time anyone in the world has heard about it. So again, it'll be a first for BioHealth and all you guys for being in the room. And also we'll mention a special price that we have on offer in terms of for people to try the test, because we've always found that if you try the test yourselves, that gives you confidence to offer the testing to your patient population. So I'm just going to start with a few definitions on the basis that, as we all are aware, providers and patients are maybe not as accurate in terms of the definitions as they should be. So allergy is obviously instant prophylactic shock, immune response, and so bad things happen straight away. What we're testing is food sensitivity, which is more, as I've heard described, as a mystery, because again, it's the delayed nature of up to 72 hours. So I would argue with an IgE, given the instant reaction, you generally know whether you've had an IgE response or not. But the mystery with the food sensitivity is that delay of up to 72 hours. So again, very difficult for a patient to tell you what they've consumed in a 72 hours time period, let alone of those foods that they've eaten, which are the ones which are actually causing that inflammatory response. So again, we're very fortunate. We've been in business now for just over 12 years, and we have just over 10,000 clients running the test all around the world. And so I'm often asking them, what is a good patient to run this test on? And so you can see behind me a long list of symptoms: weight loss, autoimmune, migraine, autism we're seeing more of now, and obviously the classical digestive and skin-related issues. And I think what's been interesting over that 11-year period, we did some early research, and what we saw was things like anxiety, brain fog were really quite high in terms of the symptomology that we saw about 10 years ago. Maybe we didn't have the confidence that we have today, and obviously the research that backs it up now, that strong link between the brain and the gut barrier. So again, that's really something that maybe 10 years ago, if we'd been braver, we'd have talked about, but now I think it's a very common thing. Which brain is the most important? Is it this brain or is it this brain? So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through as well. So that's the when we have our providers running the test. The why is because, again, the inflammation that's associated with foods is an underlying problem for many of the conditions that you see on a daily basis. So what is great about this test, again, from a functional medicine perspective, it gets to the root cause. So that's the key here. It's looking at, on an individualized basis, which foods are causing inflammation, which again, from a functional medicine standpoint, is the root cause of many of the symptoms that we talked about on that previous slide. How do we get to that root cause? It's a patented test, and we're the only company in the world to have a patented food sensitivity test. And the way it works is we look at multiple pathways. So we're looking at not only IgG, we look at IgG plus complement, and the complement activation via the marker C3d. So in essence, what we're doing is we take the IgG, which is the classical test that you see from most providers, but the limitation with that is it's really only telling you which foods a patient is exposed to versus which ones are causing inflammation. So we then go on and run the complement activation and work out what might be going on with the complement to find out, more importantly, which foods are truly creating an inflammatory response. So the idea is, the way to think about it is, the IgG gives us a way of understanding which foods they're exposed to, but then we go on to then measure the complement activation to see of those foods they're exposed to, which ones are actually causing an inflammatory response. So in essence, we're eliminating the false positive and zeroing in on the key foods of interest, which are a lot more linked to the symptoms that they may well present with. So in essence, what we're doing, which makes us unique, is we're looking at the whole immune system. We're not just looking at the half, i.e. the acquired. We go on and measure the innate immunity, and that's the big difference with this test. So it gives you a way of measuring the whole immune system. So when your patient says, oh, but I want to run this IgG test, you say, why would you look at half the immune system when you can look at the whole immune system, which will be much more beneficial in terms of what you're doing. So this cartoon kind of helps explain that a bit better maybe. On the left-hand side, you see the IgG only, i.e. that single pathway in terms of telling you what you're exposed to. On the right-hand side, you have our patented approach, which looks at the IgG, but more importantly, the complement activation. So the way of eliminating the false positives and really zeroing in on the key foods of interest. So just a kind of good example of that, I ran an IgG-only test and came up with 20 foods. When I ran the FIT test, our food inflammation test here, I came up with 5. So it shows you that what this test really demonstrates is a way of eliminating false positives and zeroing the patients in on the key foods of interest. And what that enables them to do is really be compliant, because as we all know, if you tell a patient here's 20 foods not to eat, they're going to ignore you. If you say here's 5, which are based on inflammation, the root cause of disease, then you get, that's when the magic happens, and that's when you start seeing a much better response from the patient's populations in terms of what's going on. The test was set up, the company was founded about 20 years ago now by a gentleman called Dr. Brent Dorval, whose not insignificant claim to fame was he invented the first rapid HIV diagnostic. So the reason I tell you that is everything we do is through an infectious disease lens. So it gives us a way of making sure we're highly accurate, highly reproducible with everything we do. So we're based just outside Boston, but we're really excited that we have a lab here in Mexico City as well. So again, any of you have had the misfortune of running into Mexican customs trying to get a sample out of the US, you don't need to worry about that. We have a lab here in Mexico. So again, we want to make sure that we are present in the countries that we are participating in. We're not just coming in, flying in, and then flying off. We are participating and are alive and well in Mexico City. Albeit with the traffic may delay us a couple of days, but generally everything is alive and well, and we have the lab in Mexico City as well. Everything we do is through ISO certified manufacturing and FDA registered as well. So it's FDA and ISO registered. And as I say, everything we do is based around the patent that we had granted, which enables us to make sure that we're the only company that can look at this multiple pathway approach to eliminate the false positives and really zero in on the key foods of interest. And we control the entire value chain. So for example, we own the C3D cell line. I can tell you who actually caught the mackerel that is on our FIT 176. So again, we want to make sure we know all the foods are organic and where they're all sourced from, so again that we can make sure it's organic and accurate and have high levels of control over everything we do. And again, the nice thing about being down here today is I can introduce you and say, we've achieved Cofepris and Anvisa, and have people nod. When I tell the Americans about Cofepris, they kind of go, well, I don't know what that is. So the nice thing is we have that approval here in Mexico, and we're very excited about that in terms of another example of we want to be present in a market versus just turn up. So we run 176 different foods, colorings, and additives on our main panel. What we're showing here is we have 3 panels. So we have a FIT 22, a FIT 132, and a FIT 176. And those numbers are associated with the number of foods, colorings, and additives that we measure. The report we've intentionally tried to make simple. As you can tell, Dr. Dorval is a very bright man, PhD, as well as his invention of the rapid HIV diagnostic. So we've taken a lot of time to try and make sure that the reporting is very straightforward, that a patient and a busy provider like you people here today can easily understand. The reports are in multiple languages. Obviously it's in Spanish, Portuguese, and any other languages you can think of, Japanese, Chinese. Thailand is another big market for us as well. So it's very easy to understand, and it's 3 pages. One of the other key differences that we have is that we measure colorings and additives. And the reason we do that is if you think about those things in like a 3D world, they're in processed foods, and a lot of our patients are eating processed foods. They're increasingly in supplements, so you need to get patients to think about what they're consuming from a supplement standpoint as well. And thirdly, they're in personal hygiene products, so they need to think about shampoos, washing powders, things like that. I had an example of a provider the other day telling me that she had a 9-year-old boy who was very lethargic, and it turned out he was 4+, so in the red on our scale for benzoic acid. And so obviously she wasn't aware he was consuming that. It turned out it was in his shampoo and his mother's washing powder. They eliminated the benzoic acid, the source of it, and within 2 weeks he was back to his normal self. So again, it's really important to think of those colorings and additives as key ingredients that people are using. Another good example is the red dye in the colorings and additives was invented by Bayer Pharmaceuticals after World War II to color plastic. So no one had any concept that a coloring for plastic from the 1940s would find its way into the food chain that we have. So again, I'm not sure we can demonstrate that as progress as a population, but that's where we're at in terms of the quality and where we find things in food today. So one of the other important elements we do, again, we want to make sure these patients are compliant, and I'm sure as many of you have run food sensitivity tests, one of the first questions the patient says, oh, what can I eat? So the idea is we provide a 7-day meal plan, so when the patient gets the test result, they also get an individualized meal plan. So that gives them a path forward, and they're not always dependent on you, the provider. So the idea is they get their test result, we've eliminated the false positives, it's a small number of foods, generally 5 to 10, and they get their own individualized meal plan, so they've got a pathway forward in terms of how they go. As I have seen, as we have all seen, no one will walk around Mexico or any part of the country or the world without their cell phone. So what we've also done is we put their test results on the cell phone. So that our patient app is available in Portuguese, Spanish, and English. So again, another example where we're trying to make sure we're participating in the market fully by making sure all these things are available in the multiple languages. So again, this app gives them a way of looking at their test results, and for each food that they're sensitive to, we give them a little bit more information. So we tell them what it might cross-react with, where they might find it, and some alternatives and substitutes. So it just gives them a little bit more information, and because it's on their phone, we all know everyone has their phone with them the whole time. The meal plan's on there, so if they're grocery shopping, they can have that phone with them and they can make sure they get the foods they need as well. So again, we've tried to make sure we invest heavily in compliance tools to make sure your patients can be compliant and follow through on the great testing that you're offering them. So we'll just talk briefly about some of the new products we've developed as well. The Fit 176 is our largest and newest panel. And again, we've been working with just over 300 providers on this to come up with some new foods and things that were a bit more relevant in terms of the current world as well. So we looked at it to give a deeper dive into things like the grains. So we now measure gliadin, amaranth, buckwheat, things like that. And we also thought about some of the supplements that patients are on, because a lot of them will be put on supplements after they've run a food sensitivity test. So we added things like goji berry, monk fruit, stevia, and there are a lot of the powders that patients will be on. Some are used as sweeteners within there. So it's important to know before they be put on a supplement that they're not going to be causing them a problem either. Another ones that we added was anchovy, mackerel, and sardine. They're the 3 main ingredients of omega-3. So occasionally, slightly worryingly, I'll hear from some providers, they'll say, James, love your test, came up with only a few foods for me when I ran it, but I don't eat sardines. And I said, well, that's interesting. Do you have an omega-3 every morning? They're like, how did you know that? I said, because that's where the sardine comes from. So again, it's important to know what's in the supplements, not only that you're taking, but also you're prescribing to some of your patients as well. Obviously, being where we are, we made sure we've got black bean, tapioca as well, some of the foods which are more commonly eaten in this part of the world. So moving on to our gut barrier panel. So again, the classic, which came first, the chicken or the egg? So often when we've been talking to providers, what I was hearing is, I don't run a food sensitivity test because I think the patient has leaky gut. So that kind of stuck in my mind. It's like, why do you think they've got leaky gut? Are you not testing to find out, do they have leaky gut or not? And it turned out there wasn't really a very good test out there. So we thought, well, why don't we develop something that will give the providers some help to answer that question of the chicken and the egg, or the food sensitivity versus the leaky gut. So we've developed this gut barrier panel. So if you think of leaky gut as a continuum, it's really difficult to say that here's one marker which will clearly identify leaky gut. So we thought, given it's a continuum, let's come up with 3 solid gut panel markers to give you a way of testing your patients rather than guessing to see whether they have that leaky gut versus food sensitivity. So we looked at it in a couple of ways. So we look at IgA. IgA is a good secretory marker, generally found localized in the gut, and as a marker of early stage signs of something may be going on. The IgG in the complement, think of it more as systemic, longer term, so it's probably been going on for a longer time period. And then with the Candida, we use as an early sign of some level of dysbiosis going on. The zonulin, think about it in terms of those tight junctions, in terms of how well they're working. Someone was telling me about, maybe we think about it as a glue, or maybe a better example would be oil of an engine, in terms of how well those tight junctions are working. And then occludin, thirdly, is structure. So how well are those tight junctions structurally holding together? Is that band tight, or has it come apart? And so again, all important information to know. And so again, what we've been finding is, back to that kind of gut barrier and brain barrier type combination, we've been seeing a lot of patients who've either been heavily stressed or with depression and things like that have been coming up on this gut barrier panel. So it's really proving an interesting insight into what's going on at a tight junction level, to see how that's influencing overall health versus just gut health. And again, if you think of 80% of the immune system is in the gut, that's why it's so critical to make sure you understand what might be going on there as well. So again, we're a very heavily science-based company. So as you can tell, with the only patented food sensitivity test that we developed in-house, we own the C3D cell line for that part of the business. And with zonulin, we found the same thing. We were very dissatisfied with the quality of zonulin assays on the market. So 4 years ago, I'm pretty sure my R&D team didn't tell me it was going to take them 5 years, but anyway, when we said, let's develop a zonulin assay. And again, we've partnered with the best people in the world to do this. So if any of you are familiar with zonulin, you will be very familiar with Dr. Alessio Fasano. So he's based in Boston as well, so we're very fortunate to have access to someone with that type of knowledge and brain. So we worked with him and our very own Dr. Brent Dorval with all his assay development skills, and really went to Fasano and said, look, what are some of the issues that if we develop our own test needs addressing? So he told me, look, one of the issues is the zonulin protein is an unstable assay at the moment. So if you run it in the morning, you'll get a different answer if you ran it in the afternoon. He said, so there's a stability issue, James, we need to address. It also cross-reacts with haptoglobin and properdin. He said, so that's a problem as well. So we're not getting a true positivity rate that we should do. He said, when I first published the data in the Lancet in the early 2000s, we demonstrated a positivity rate around 15 to 20%. And I know, because we were running it in our lab at the time, we were seeing it around 5%. And so again, it wasn't really consistent with clinical symptoms. And then the last one, and again, I'm sure most of you, again, familiar with zonulin, should it be a stool test or should it be a blood test? Because again, you can do it as a stool test. So again, I went to Fasano, I said, look, you've done a lot of research over the last 20 years in this. What is your assay or sample of choice? He said, James, the only sample I have ever done research on is in blood. Okay, so bear that in mind if you think I'm going to run a stool test. No. His strong view to me was the only time he'd ever run a zonulin assay was a blood sample. So that made up our mind, so it was going to be a blood sample. So we've made sure it's a blood sample, which is great because it fits in with the ELISA testing that we currently do. On top of that, we then went back to basics and developed a unique zonulin, recombinant zonulin protein, which has enabled us to come up with a zonulin antibody, which is uniquely stable and does not cross-react with either haptoglobin or properdin. So again, we dealt with all the issues he saw, and then lastly, as we launched it, we started seeing that magic number of 15 to 20% positivity rate. And again, if you think of your clientele, think of your patients, generally most of them will be prime candidates for having some level of leaky gut. So again, I think that feels like it's much more clinically relevant than some of the other tests that were out there. So again, we're very happy that, as from a science standpoint, and sorry to take you on that detour, but it's important that when people say, well, I'm running a food sensitivity test or a zonulin test, you need to know that they've taken it back to basics and really understand the full value chain versus just going, I saw someone else had a test, so I'm just going to copy it. No, we make everything ourselves, and so that has been a real differentiator as we've all been dealing with kind of cost of living crisis, increasing in pricing. We have not increased pricing on any of our tests because we developed them from scratch. And so we do not want to be passing on that kind of problem to you and to your patients. So again, this is a new panel that we have with the gut barrier panel, so we have a third page of the report. So again, apologies, it's 3 pages, but again, much better than some tests I see where it's 70 pages. It's really tough to understand. We wanted to keep it simple so you and your patients can understand it. So the gut barrier panel is now on that third page. There's a brief explanation of each of those things so patients can hear that. And then the fourth line on that report that you'll see, hopefully as you start running it, is if any of these markers are positive, please refer to your provider to go on a good gut healing protocol. So we're very excited that we have 3 in the US, and we're even more excited we're going to have one here in Mexico with our partners BioHealth. So again, that'll be something that will be available here in Mexico and hopefully other parts of Latin America, which will be a specific supplement protocol if any of your patients have any positivity of those 6 markers. So again, obviously, as an R&D company, we have some limitations that we like to do lots of R&D. So one of the things that we've just done is we've just come up with an LPS assay as well. So that is another marker that we've added to the gut barrier panel to give you another way of indicating is there leaky gut. And LPS, I'll just quickly run through it, but again, it's a major out-of-service membrane component present in most gram-negative bacteria, acts extremely strong stimulator of innate immunity. So again, thinking about the C3D, that's looking at the innate side of the immune system as well. So again, you can't ignore that given the importance of LPS. And again, it crosses the blood-brain barrier as well. Again, we talked about when we looked at the gut barrier panel, we talked about systemic, which was the IgG versus near term. So again, with LPS, if you see that IgG coming up, you know that it's impacting a number of these different disorders that you see. So from heart, liver, lungs, all sorts of things, and back to our old favorite, the brain-gut connection there as well. So again, just a few kind of highlights on it so we can kind of quickly go through this for you. The nice thing here is, again, if you have increased LPS absorption, it leads to 3 things, or 2 things. Increased endotoxemia as well as increased inflammation. So again, we wanted to make sure as a marker that was key to pick up on. So again, if you think gut permeability leads to increased endotoxin absorption, that's why it was important for us to add LPS to give you a more rounded picture of what might be going on from a leaky gut perspective. So again, we've developed a number of new materials. So again, we talked about these supplement protocols from the likes of Biotics, Nutridyne, which I know you can get access to here in Mexico, as well as Nutritional Frontiers, and as well as we're talking about with BioHealth, so we'll have an opportunity to give you access to that as well. We've got a number of videos. We did a great webinar with BioHealth about a month ago with Dr. Robert Silverman, going over all this data and more information as well. So again, it's really good that we've got that in Spanish, and again, obviously this will be going out live to people as well. So again, it's great that this is translated into Spanish, so you have access to not only Dr. Silverman, myself, and we also have Dr. Brent Dorval, who did a talk as well a year or so again, talking about all this information for you as well. So again, in summary, Again, it's a patented multi-pathway detection technology. It's been broadly adapted. As I said, we've got just over 10,000 providers running it. We've developed a number of compliance tools, an easy-to-read report, the meal plan, which is individualized, the patient app, and now these supplement protocols to make your life much easier. And then again, we've done lots of research on this testing. We did an IRB-approved study looking at IBS patients, for example, and we've got ongoing studies going on at the moment. We have one going on in China, and we have one with some dentists in the US as well, and we're continually doing more research to prove how well the test works. And again, as you can tell, we've developed the LPS test now, the full gap barrier panel, which is all new from when we were here last year. So again, excited to kind of get that out to you. The last thing, just to tell you, we're doing an offer today. So the pricing is normally $385. It's reduced to $200, and we'll be doing finger stick tests here as well. So we learned a while ago that if you give people a kit, they may not run it, but if we make sure we do the test for them on here, then we'll be able to talk to you about the results, which we're all very excited about. And lastly, as I talked about, we are based here in Mexico City through our partnership with MedPrimex and Roberto, who will be on our KBMO stand, which is literally just outside the door here. But again, if you don't get a chance to see him, then those are all the contact information there as well. So again, thank you all. Thank BioHealth for laying on such a great congress for everyone. And again, if there's any questions, we'll be on the booth and happy to kind of go through them. And thank you again all for your time.